Welcome to the Confidently Balance Your Hormones podcast. My name is Dee Davidson, and I'm a hormone health expert, master mindset coach, and multiple wellness business entrepreneur. I'm obsessed with helping you experience hormone balance, confidence, self-love, and live a life full of joy. I know we're about to have so much fun together, so thank you so much for pushing play today. And now let's begin. Welcome to the Confidently Balance Your Hormones podcast. This is your guide, Dee Davidson, and today I'm thrilled to have a special guest on with me. You'll hear some great information from Dustin, so get out your pen and paper. Dustin is a mentor, clinical advisor, FDN-P, who has become a friend. Dustin played a pivotal role as my mentor during my certification journey, and he continues to be my go-to expert for unraveling client cases. And I'm just really impressed by his commitment to staying at the forefront of health, both personal and with clients. I'm just really impressed by you, Dustin, and I'm excited to talk about the fascinating connection between hormones and weight today. So welcome, Dustin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dee. I'm super excited to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of hormones and weight, is there anything you'd like to share with the audience about your own FDN journey or your clinical experience?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm always happy to share. I definitely am totally excited about health in every way, shape, and form. And the reason why is because it started out, at a, very young age for me to not be healthy. And so I've just come to realize that that is our true biggest asset is our health. And so I definitely encourage everyone to, get understood, right? And that's certainly what you and I do as FDNs, is to help them understand the big picture of what's going on in their health and creating, metabolic chaos and imbalance. But there isn't a whole lot in my life that I don't try when it comes to health, and there isn't a whole lot that I won't spend when it comes to health. And so anyhow, the health endeavor, like I'm sure a lot of your audience knows, is not an inexpensive one, but it is definitely a worthy one. And we so need to, understand that if we're going to have quality health, we definitely need to eat that quality food, and it costs more, right? Or we need to have the quality modalities to help us achieve that health this day and age, because we're kind of biohacking our way out of an unnatural, unnormal world, right? So what I've done, Dee, and I think this is something that worth talking about, is that I've made the expenses in my life of, whether it's vehicle or home or whatever it is, at a point and less, basically less, or to a point where I can spend more money on my health. And so anyhow, I encourage my clients oftentimes to do that if there is a distinguishing factor, right? That they have to spend a little bit less somewhere, then maybe it's going to be on those things that, aren't their most precious asset, which is their health. So that's certainly what I've done.
I love that. And I know you and I talk, almost weekly, and we do talk about, priorities and making our health a priority is so important, because once you lose your health, it's really hard to regain it, and all of the cascading effects of losing your health and, income and people having to take care of you and all that stuff. So I love that. And again, I'm just so impressed at all of the things that you share with me that you do, from your food to your sauna that you built. Very, very cool. I'm excited to share you with my audience today.
Awesome.
So our topic
Super.
today, hormones and how do they affect weight? I picked hormone health because it's very personal to me. I was 40 pounds heavier. I know you've seen my collage of pictures, and I was going to the gym 6 days a week, and I was eating healthy and doing all the things, and I suspected something more was going on, which we're going to talk about the things that can be, affecting our hormones today. And I have lots of women that come to me, they've hit the age 40s, and they're like, hey, I'm doing all the things, and I think it's my hormones, but they have no idea really. They just probably have heard from someone that it's their hormones, or their doctor said it's their hormones, or just their age. So, I bet a lot of the listeners suspect that their hormones are tied into their weight and they have no idea why. So, do you mind, Dustin, just explaining a little bit about, what key hormones affect weight?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times, when we talk about hormones, there are this kind of preconceived thoughts of, we're going to discuss estrogen and we're going to discuss testosterone. And yes, those can definitely play a role. There's no doubt about it. What I would rather, kind of discuss a little bit maybe is if your audience hasn't, thought about maybe the impact of hormones like cortisol, hormones like insulin, and a hormone called glucagon. Those are kind of
Mm,
the ones that I like to, focus on when it comes to weight loss. And so, if we talk about cortisol, people understand, this is, of course, our, stress hormone. But that stress part of it, right, is going to drive our overall metabolic chaos. And I'm sure that your listeners have heard about, like, somebody having like body fat from cortisol. Well, there's certainly, that is legitimate and stressful. Or stress can certainly tie into that, but I think what really it comes down to is the increase of cortisol increases blood sugar, and
right.
so blood sugar is one of our main drivers, right, to gaining body fat. And then we go into that other hormone that, of course, we need to put that blood sugar away into the cells and get it out of the bloodstream, because it can be very dangerous if it's high for too long. And that's going to be insulin.
Okay.
And so we really don't want that insulin, elevated. And so we've also heard about people that have insulin resistance. We have, of course, diseases that are around that, and that's not really our goal, but our goal would be more about, like, not having that insulin resistance in our lives, because, the more that we do, the more sugar is not going to be handled, and therefore the more damage could be happening, including weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of that last scenario is that, we have a hormone that works opposite of insulin. And this is a hormone called glucagon that basically does exactly what insulin, or opposite of what insulin does. So insulin is going to put that sugar away in the body, into the cells, kind of put the fuel source away. Well, glucagon is, for the most part, going to bring fuel back to the cells, but it's the fuel that we really want to utilize, which is body fat.
Okay.
And so it puts those fatty acids back into the bloodstream to be utilized. And there's key ways that we can, of course, improve all of these hormones. And I, hope that that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Definitely. And, I know you're a statistics guy and you have lots of references and have pointed me in a lot of directions. I forget what I saw that recently that said how many people how many Americans will have type 2 diabetes in the
Oh,
next 10
yeah.
or 20 years. So again, blood sugar regulation is just so crazy. And I know we're going to get into a little bit more about that, but can we just talk a little about that for a second and just uh, talk about the importance of eating like low sugar foods and real food?
Sure, you bet. Yeah. There probably isn't a bigger focus, when it comes to health, that could be worthwhile than to get our blood sugar dialed in, as best as possible. There is newer technology out there, right, called the CGMs, or
Hmm.
continuous glucose monitors. That's certainly one way. Kind of the older fashioned way is to prick your finger and check it out. But Dee, there's, when you had talked about this type 2 diabetes, there is so many devastating effects of, high blood sugar in the
Hmm.
body. And, we have heard about some of the extreme effects of people, losing their, limbs, or losing their eyesight due
Hmm.
to, basically this diabetes scenario. But it's basically comes down to that your nervous system and your blood system, basically your circulation, is highly affected when there's excessive blood sugar.
Hmm.
And so then, of course, right, when we shut the nerves down or we shut the blood supply down, we're going to really impact our ability to, for example, wound heal, right? So that's
Right.
one of those big things. We're not going to be ultimately wound healing. But I think one of the things that basically I remember in my mind that constantly is a great reminder about how devastating the blood sugar is on the nervous system is that many doctors today even refer to Alzheimer's
Right.
as type 3
Oh,
diabetes.
wow.
Yes. So anyhow, I first heard that in one of Dr. David Perlmutter's, books,
Hmm.
because, he's a neurologist and, he definitely knows what he's doing,
Hmm.
and talking about when it comes to the brain. But that just shows you right there about how powerful, right, managing our blood sugar is. If we can keep this brain from, of course, going where we don't want it to, just by managing our blood sugar, that is a very, very important scenario. And it really comes down to, I'll get a little technical here, but we have what we call advanced glycation in products that are essentially, sugar that's so high in the blood
Hmm.
that it attaches to protein structures in the body
Okay.
and basically kind of just caramelizes them or gunks them up. And ages, which is advanced glycation in products, are basically that they
Wow.
age the body, but bigger than that, they can contribute to these amyloid beta plaques, or these gunked up, twisted up proteins in the brain that they definitely associated with neurodegenerative diseases.
Wow. So bottom line is get your blood sugar under control, right, Dustin? It's so
Yes.
important. And I know I went off topic a little bit here, but so, I'm sure people are wondering, you're mentioning these three hormones, but how do these hormones even get out of balance?
It really does come down to, like, let's say cortisol, for an example. It comes down to what you and I look at, Dee, on a daily basis, which is truly the internal and the external stressors of the body.
Hmm.
And so we can do our best, and we all try to do our best, hopefully, of, like, getting our meditations in, or getting our, breathing in, or, just being aware and of our surroundings, and kind of trying to calm ourselves down on too much stress, right? So that would be an
Hmm.
external scenario. But what we dive into, you and I, with these functional lab testing is the internal stressors that can certainly ramp up this cortisol, right?
Right.
We can have anything from, different pathogens, different bugs, of course, or, liver congestion and hormonal imbalances, when it comes down to like estrogens and testosterone and so forth, that can be definitely out of balance. But anyhow, those external stressors also
Hmm.
can be things like, our body care products, right, that are basically raising our stress response, those EMFs that we fill our environment with,
Hmm.
and so anyhow, so that would be, kind of how that cortisol would get out of balance, is the internal external stressors. When it comes to, certainly insulin, I think that all of us understand that if we're going to be eating too much sugar,
Right.
that would be definitely one way of doing it. The other way would be that, we don't, of course, engage in physical activity.
Uh-huh.
We know that that's really an important part of it, and there's certainly a piece there, though, right, that you could do over exercising, and that would be one of these stressors to overdo cortisol, and that wouldn't be a good thing either. And so, like you were saying earlier, Dee, if you're gonna go to the gym, right, and you're
Right.
just hitting it hard all the time, you could certainly have just basically contribute to the weight gain by increasing that cortisol.
Hmm.
But yeah, we definitely want to, eat less sugar. Of course, that makes sense to get that insulin. That can be how it gets out of balance. Also, these polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are the seed oils
Okay.
that we get in these processed foods, can really decrease our ability to be sensitive to insulin. So that's certainly one thing. The Our sleeping habits can certainly get that insulin out of balance. So an example here that I heard years ago was, one night of poor sleep can make you as insulin resistant as a type 2 diabetic.
Wow.
So that's just one
I
night,
know. I had
right?
someone say I got to catch up on sleep the other day, and I said, "Oh no, that doesn't exist. You
That's
can't you
right.
can't catch up on sleep, people."
That's right. That's exactly what they say, that you just basically lost it. There's no chance of going back.
Hmm.
And so we just, yeah, we need to make those habits definitely. But But anyhow, and then when it comes to glucagon, that's definitely just going to be opposite of what we would basically do to throw insulin kind of out of balance. If we throw glucagon out of balance, that means we're not getting enough high quality protein. That means we're doing, of course, too many sugars. And so what we want to do, right, to get that, hormone back, utilizing for us, to burn body fat, is to eat that high quality protein to potentially get in some of the intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talked just about stressors.
Mm-hmm.
Intermittent fasting can be a stressor, but we want to use it as a benefit or a tool for us. And that can just be if, somebody isn't exactly perfectly balanced,
Mm-hmm.
we can basically come back to like just utilizing a set feeding time, for an example, of like cutting down that window of eating where you say, hey, I am done at 5 p.m. and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not having anything else. And if you're not eating again until, let's say, 7 in the morning, I mean, you're getting what, 14 hours of
Fasting,
fasting,
yeah.
right?
Right.
So yeah, and so that works out really well to help improve glucagon levels.
That's a great point. A couple things that popped up in my head that I have questions for you. Number one is, what if someone's tracking their sugars? I've never really had anyone track their sugars. I just tell them to, you know, track their blood sugar levels and space out their meals and have their magic plates and things like that. But if someone is listening, because I know that, especially with kids, with having an 11 and a 13-year-old, I forget what the number of grams of sugar that the average American child has. But if someone were to ask you, Dustin, like they're tracking grams of sugar, what should they be maxed out at daily?
Mm-hmm. You know, what would be really ideal, right, is that, when it actually comes to sugar, we totally keep that like for that once in a while or occasional scenario.
Hmm.
I think what we would mainly want to focus on is like how many carbohydrates
Okay.
would be kind of better. But real quick on that, D, like, when we eat 1 teaspoon of sugar, that's 4 grams.
Okay.
Okay. So if somebody comes across like 4 grams of sugar in their, whatever, their coffee,
Hmm.
they're eating already a teaspoon. Most of the time, it ends up being like, 16 grams, which is more like 4 teaspoons just in their coffee.
Oh, wow.
But our body doesn't necessarily have to have, sugar, but we know that the brain runs on a fair amount of carbohydrates. We
Hmm.
do want to, get some of that fuel coming from, fatty acids, which would be our ketone fuel. But back to the kind of the carbohydrate scenario, I would say that we really would do best if we kept ourselves under the 150 grams a day
Okay.
area.
Okay.
But to give you an example of what that looks like, the average American eats at least double that in their day, if not sometimes double that in a meal.
Oh, wow.
So yes, they can do 300 grams in a meal or 300 in a day, depending, of course, on the person and what they're eating.
And to clarify, that's any kind of carbohydrate, even if it's a single ingredient sweet potato, or we're talking any carbs.
Any carbs, and those would be the ones we would want to focus on. So I'm glad you had brought that up, because those would be the ones that are what we call more of a complex carb, that have the fiber, they also have the nutrients attached. And that's why it wouldn't be really justifiable by us as health coaches to give a sugar thing of saying, hey, you know what, you could go ahead and have 20 grams of sugar a day.
Mm,
I would feel awful about recommending 5 teaspoons of sugar a
sure.
day to somebody. But instead, I could say, yeah, if you had 150 grams of carbs and you got these from these complex sources of vegetables and tubers and beans or whatever, right, these more complex carbs, that would probably be a better scenario, because again, we're going to spike less insulin because glucose isn't coming up as fast.
Right. Great,
Yep.
great point there. Because I know a lot of people, when they first come to you and I, they might be eating a lot of processed food. We know that it's a transition of what people are used to, fast and convenient, these protein bars and protein shakes with all this sugar in it. And that's, a question I get quite often. So that's a good way to present it for sure. The other thing I
Right.
was thinking about was the fasting. So great point. I talk a lot with the women that I work with in regard to fasting and cutting off the time at night. I love that you reiterate that too, because a lot of women just aren't, they're intermittent fasting in the morning. And I don't even think it's intentional. They just don't eat breakfast or say they're not hungry. And we can talk about that, or we cannot, but how they've kind of suppressed that hunger hormone. But, cutting it off at night is a great way to do it, as opposed to when you need energy for the whole day and your body sees it as a stressor. At night, you can still be doing the fasting, cut off eating earlier in the evening.
Right. Yeah, I think the evening scenario is so great because it does a few different things for us, right? We oftentimes are less active, at night. Of course, we're going to be sleeping, and so that's a great time to not have a bunch of fuel in, but on top of that, our digestion really does need a rest. And so if we're actually giving our body that opportunity to rest, it's such a great time. And then other also we're not awake a lot of that time,
Mm-hmm.
so we're not having to focus on is our blood sugar correct or whatever it is. And but to your point, I would say, yeah, we do want to get ourselves into that habit where we're not deciding that every day is a big long fast because we've decided that on top of the whole night, we're going to skip breakfast too.
Mm-hmm.
And then we end up basically getting that situation where we're in that more kind of external internal stress
Mm-hmm.
that would just raise the cortisol and kind of keep you running off of your sugar that is coming from the body. And this brings up a great point. So D, if you're fasting, okay,
Okay.
and you actually upregulate glutathione,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, not glutathione, but glucagon.
Okay.
If you upregulate glucagon, the other hormone we were talking about, if you get it to the point where it's basically breaking down your liver and your muscles, right? It's taking this glycogen storage or the stored sugar out of your muscles and putting this blood sugar into the body,
Mm-hmm.
then guess what? We have just kind of created another stressor for the body to kind of raise blood sugar. Well,
Mm.
often when we raise cortisol then raises blood sugar afterwards if it's too long and too much.
Okay.
And so this is kind of why we don't want to do these long extended fasts all the time. Now they're okay once in a while, and when you and I see their functional labs, we can see whether or not their body actually can handle it. If they're in the exhaustive phase of HPA axis dysfunction, and some of your listeners may know what that is, but basically the brain's not communicating well to the adrenals, so we're not going to be making our hormones correctly, and therefore we just don't need additional some massive stressors like too much fasting
Mm-hmm.
or all the time fasting. And so we do want to use these tools like exercise, like fasting, to our advantage and not our
Mm-hmm.
disadvantage.
Yeah, makes
Mhm.
sense. And, some of the listeners might be thinking exhaustive. That's not me. But I just want to share that I was in that exhaustive phase. And, many people would have looked at me and thought, like, she's in peak health and, everything's great with her. But, I had those internal stressors and I was fasting and doing boot camps on in a fasted state. So, you can't really judge by the exterior whether someone's in an exhaustive phase or not, right, Dustin?
Yeah, yeah, I'm right there with you. I was also there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how can we? I know we've talked about a few things here, but how can we balance our hormones to improve weight? What?
Yeah, you know what? That is super good. We definitely want to let's kind of break it down here. When we talked about cortisol, we definitely want to figure out ways that we can, of course, eliminate the stressors,
Mhm.
right? And we want to get those internal and externals. But we also want to make sure that we keep that blood sugar stable because, of course, that is a stressor.
Mhm.
And remember that there are natural sweeteners out there like, monk fruit or stevia if you wanted to use that to kind of get away from the sugar. It's a good transition. We did talk about, of course, sleeping better. That would certainly help. Let's get to bed, by 10 p.m. and try to get the blue light knocked back because that's certainly a stressor
Mhm.
to the body. And also, maybe avoiding a little bit less or a little more caffeine, right? We
Mhm.
can maybe bring in things that balance our body just a little more, like yerba mate tea or some mushroom coffee or something, We talked a little bit about the, EMFs. If we can just at least turn the Wi-Fi off at night, that'll get our body less sympathetic dominant, which
Okay.
is be that part of the kind of stress piece. Also, if we certainly can work with the deep breathing. I know a lot of us get into this busy day and
Mm-hmm.
busy life where we can shallow breathe
Mm-hmm.
and we don't end up, kind of managing that stress before it gets too crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But Dee, as you're so aware, like I'm such a huge supplement fan, and there's key ones that can really help us out. And I wanted to certainly give your listeners a couple of those. We do have adaptogens out there that are really helpful,
Okay.
like ashwagandha, Schisandra, rhodiola, milky oat seed. These things are really great, but they often come in like a mixed formula, so you
Okay.
can find that. But here's a great one for people that are really dealing with a cortisol overload is things like phosphatidylserine.
Okay.
They also call it PS, or there's a Rolora, and Rolora is made from the magnolia flower, basically, or but anyhow, so we can basically get those kind of things to help us
Mm-hmm.
with cortisol. Now, when it comes to insulin, we know, of course, let's drop that sugar down just a little bit, or maybe a lot, depending on who you are. We're going to increase the exercise a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
not overdoing it, of course, and then also, getting back into just a shortened eating window, maybe not too much intermittent. We talked about removing those polyunsaturated fatty acids, but also maybe increasing your vitamin D levels, as we know this is such a big deal for helping with sun.
Yes.
Our sun is one of those, but helping with insulin sensitivity. So sun would be a good source, but also, supplements. We do have good supplements that would be like cinnamon, chromium, and vanadium minerals. Bitter melanin, berberine. So there are some great things out there to help us with insulin sensitivity.
Uh-huh.
And then, like we talked earlier, with glucagon, let's definitely increase our high quality protein. Let's, eat less processed carbohydrates, and let's do those shorter intermittent fasting to give that body that right signal to improve glucagon.
Mm-hmm. And I just have to say I love cinnamon. I put it on everything. I'll even put it on a spoon and lick it. It's just so good.
Oh,
It's good stuff.
I'm with you.
It's good
It is
stuff.
so great. Do you get the Ceylon cinnamon?
No, what is that?
Ceylon is the one that they say is the very best for blood sugar management. Like you can actually get, or you can take very little and get the effect of a lot of some of the other
Oh wow, I'll
varieties
have to look for
out
it.
there. So yeah, take a look at Ceylon cinnamon. You can buy it, and actually, since somebody like myself loves it, just like you do, the bulk bags from
Okay.
like Mountain Rose Herb Company.
Okay, I'll have to go out
Um,
there and look at it.
yeah, super great.
Awesome. So let's wrap up our episode with mistakes. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people doing, and how does it interfere with them achieving the weight that they want?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. One of those, the biggest that I've kind of come to think about is that people, in general, right, just we gravitate a little bit more towards comfort. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's natural, it's just the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
but we have certainly the ability to do so this day and age, even more so. And I think that if we, I want to put this just a little bit of a perspective. So, D, if we have a vehicle, right, the
Mm-hmm.
input to that vehicle for its fuel is going to be gasoline.
Right.
Okay. So we certainly need the right input. If we want to input something into, the computer so it operates correctly, we need to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's no different than our body. We really need to have these correct inputs. And what I see is the biggest mistake that people make is the kind of wrong input into the body. And here's a great example is that our liver and our muscles, right? They hold this stored energy, like I'd mentioned earlier, of glycogen,
Right.
which is stored sugar. I don't see people wringing that out. So
Mm.
basically, like if you had a sponge, right, that was completely saturated with water,
Mm-hmm.
we would need to wring that out to hold more water,
Okay.
right? Well, if we do this with our muscles and our liver, just a few days a week where we really push that intensive cardio limit or we push that intensive muscular limit,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to wring that glycogen out. And then guess what? The body becomes insulin sensitive,
Uh-huh.
which is our real goal because we have just depleted this muscle and liver of their stored energy. And the body's going, oh, I got to get this back because I need to have it there for any time,
Right.
I'm going to be in this stressful situation. Um, I won't go too deep into all the inputs, but another one of those big inputs that we kind of sit at is this perfect, like 72 degrees
Okay.
that doesn't give our bodies this response that it ultimately, desired and needed as an ancestral human being, basically, of kind of this hot and cold exposure. So I
Okay.
do think that that's a big mistake that people don't utilize for losing weight and being their optimal healthiest fittest person
Okay.
is to really embrace this like sauna cold plunge scenario. And it doesn't have to be extreme, I mean, it can be as simple as maybe splashing some water on your face,
Uh-huh.
and that can really you and I have conversations about people getting this healthy cortisol awakening response.
Right.
And one way to do that is to stimulate their vagal tone. And so we want that vagal nerve that runs from basically the brain stem all the way down, to be stimulated,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can do this through, good inputs like cold and hot exposure. So those are kind of some of the big mistakes is like hanging out in that comfort zone of 72 degrees or not pushing yourself to the maximum. And again, this is only short durations, D. We wouldn't want to do extensive cardio where it goes longer than like 10 minutes of hardcore
Ah,
push
yeah.
up.
I recently heard someone say sprint is the best thing you can do,
Yeah.
is just get out there and sprint. And how many people, I'm going to be 50 this year. I don't see a lot of 50-year-olds sprinting anymore. I love it, but I don't see a lot of 50-year-olds sprinting.
Yeah, just one time. I mean, just go as hard as you can until you're just like out of breath and like you maybe have that little bit of feel in the back of your throat or your stomach, like, oh, this isn't comfortable,
Right.
right? And then it's over. Like that took you 2 minutes.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you've wringed out your liver of that glycogen or whatever, and then push the weights, a couple
Mm-hmm.
times a week where it's really wringing out those muscles. And we're not talking about over exercising because we're going to get right back to that cortisol piece that we were talking about earlier that we don't want to drive weight loss, inhibit weight loss with that excess cortisol.
Right. And that's another thing too is, and I know you have a lot of female clients that you work with as well, is that a lot of women, they're doing the cardio and they might be doing some group classes and stuff, but they're afraid to do the weights. And I just keep reminding you that you're not gonna, bulk up. It takes a lot to bulk up by doing weights, but it certainly is something that's necessary. Wouldn't you agree, Dustin?
It is so necessary. Yeah. I mean, especially in a women's situation where, on average, their bone density will decline a lot easier than males.
Mm-hmm.
Bone density, it's going to be that much even more important. But I'm actually glad you brought that up, D. I was a personal fitness trainer for 10 years, and I can't tell you how many times I heard that bulk up scenario. And it's really, really, really challenging for women to bulk up. And if they do, they're likely taking steroids.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is so challenging. I had a gal that worked for me for years at my personal training studio, and she lifted often and hard and heavy, and she was just very, very tiny, petite, but muscles were popping out
Uh-huh.
all over the place, right? There was no bulk.
Right.
It was just lean, and it's just the way the women's body is.
Right.
It's not naturally going to get bulky,
Nothing to be afraid of. Do it.
right?
Your body will thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Dustin, for taking the time to share your expertise and shedding light on this whole connection between hormones and weight management. As always, it was a wonderful conversation, and thanks again.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you, Dee. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Confidently Balancing Your Hormones. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to share it with a friend and also hit follow at the top of this podcast. If you have a couple of minutes and you can leave a quick review, it will help other women in need find this podcast. You can find me on Instagram at confidently_love_yourself. I would love to stay connected and hear from you.